Okay, so how did paragraph 4 go for you? I bet it was hard. This is the hardest paragraph that we have encountered in our difficult text. Um, yeah, so I'm sure that you are frustrated a little bit, and if I asked you what the topic was, I bet you'd say inner ear, which is incorrect. The inner ear is an important detail in this topic, but it is not about the inner ear at all. Well, it is. I mean, a tiny bit. It's part of it, but the overall topic is not the inner ear. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to model for you paragraph 4. And then I'm probably just going to have to tell you what the topic is, which is not as much fun as if I had you in class, because usually I make you come up with it. And I can't do that because you're not here, which is very sad for me. But even though this is how I kept track of my thinking as I read about the vestibular apparatus. And by the way, I still don't have a lot of background knowledge. I have no idea how the vestibular apparatus really works because this is the only thing I've read about it. So I still have a lack of background knowledge, which is a problem. And how I would solve that is I would look stuff up. But I'm not going to right now because that's cheating. And I want to be able to show you the problem solving that goes through this paragraph. Okay, so the vestibular apparatus, which is something I don't know, so I always box things I do not know. The vestibular apparatus in the inner ear, now I do know about the inner ear, has two distinct components. And again, two distinct components. I know what I'm looking for. So this author is also giving me a little bit of a clue of what I need to be looking for. Two distinct components. The semicircular canals, and that's our first thing, right? Our semicircular canals. And again, I don't really know what those are. So I'm going to start off by putting down vocabulary to learn. And the first thing is vestibular apparatus, because I don't know. And the second thing is the semicircular canals. Okay, and then look at this author gives us the nice brackets, parentheses again. So the semicircular canals are three mutually perpendicular, and I am always a little bit, I always have to remind myself that perpendicular is like an intersection, right? Perpendicular. They'd intersect each other. Fluid-filled tubes that contain hair cells connected to nerve fibers. So semicircular canals are tubes filled with hair cells and fluid connected to nerve fibers. Okay? And then this is in the inner ear. I know that. All right. So that's something that I've learned so far. Okay? So here's another trick that I'd like to teach you here. So it says the semicircular canals, and then it gives you these brackets or these parentheses that tell you what the semicircular canals are. They are three mutually perpendicular fluid-filled tubes that contain hair right, connected to nerve fibers. Now that's a lot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reread it, and I'm going to skip all of the stuff in the parentheses because I want to know I want to read this sentence fluently, and this is getting in the way of my fluency because there's so much to this definition. If it was just like one word, I could probably figure it out, but it isn't. It's almost a sentence in itself. So I'm going to skip over it, and I'm going to see what it says without the parenthetical. Okay, so it says the vestibular apparatus in the inner ear has two distinct components: a semicircular canal, which are sensitive to angular acceleration, all right, of the head. All right, so angles, I know what an angle is. Angle, right? And then I know what acceleration means too. It's movement. And I mostly know that because I drive a car, and I know what the accelerator is on the car is how I make the car go, right? If I want the car to go, then I press on the accelerator. So I know that acceleration means that I am moving or going faster. And then it's the head. Huh. All right, so I'm going to switch cameras for a second here. Hi. So angular acceleration of the head means that I can move my head all over the place, right? This is my angular acceleration of the head. All right. Moving back, now I'm dizzy. Okay. So the angular acceleration of the head, I'm picturing that in my head. So I'm going to put a visual here. And I just gave you a really nice visual as well. And the otolith organ. So here's my connecting word and. So this must be my second component of the vestibular apparatus, which is the otolith organs, which I still don't know what that is. So again, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put that here in my notes. Otolith organs. So, because if this again looks, it feels like health or biology or some sciencey thing, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to use the specific vocabulary, not the definition that's in the parentheses, because here's the parentheses again. They're going to tell us what those otoliths are. And the otoliths are two sacs filled with calcium carbonate, or carbonate, I guess, crystals. Calcium carbonate crystals embedded in gel. All right, so I'm going to write that down here. 2 sacs filled with calcium. Okay. So again, and you know what I've been doing is since I've had to stop and do a lot of note taking, there's another thing that I've been doing is I've been rereading. So that's a strategy that I'm going to put down here because I don't know if I have another, I might have another definition and I kind of want the vocabulary to be together, but I'm doing a lot of rereading and annotating to keep track of the text, right? Those are my biggest strategies here, is that I'm trying to keep track of my thinking by rereading and annotating. Okay, so I'm going to do that again because see, when I have to stop and write things, then I kind of lose my momentum in my reading. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, the otolith organs, and again, I'm going to skip this. This is just the definition. So I'm going to skip the whole parentheses just so I can keep that fluency going. And that's also, I guess, a strategy, right? Skip. Sorry, that's supposed to be an E. To increase fluency. All right, so I'm going to do that. The otoliths, which respond to linear acceleration. So here's acceleration again, and now I need to figure out linear acceleration. So I know that linear means straight up and down. This is why I use a pencil. Like this, right? Linear. It's linear, it's straight up and down. Okay, so linear acceleration is not like my head all around doing the angles. It's just straight up and down. So my body is going to be straight up and down, which means I'm standing up, right? Straight up and down. I'm not bent, sitting down, I'm not squatting, straight up and down. So I'm standing. So you can picture in your head here what that is in a body, right? And then we have the word acceleration. We've already defined that up here as movement. So if my body is straight up and down and I'm accelerating, then I must be walking. Or running, maybe? Okay. All right, so the otolith organs are dealing with walking or running, linear acceleration. The semicircular canals are dealing with my head movement, right? Okay. So I'm going to put that down here, dealing with head movement here, right? And I'm going to put here with walking or running. Okay. Okay. Because movement of the crystals in the otoliths generates a signal of, there's that word again, acceleration. And remember, if you remember the Harvard article, Interrogating Texts, one of the things that that article talked about was to keep track of repetition of words. And so already, we're not even done yet, and we have acceleration 3 times. So this must be a big deal to keep track of. That's what Harvard would say, right? Harvard would say, keep track. They're talking about acceleration here. It must be important if they're talking about it in 3 different places already in one paragraph. So I'm gonna just make sure that underline every time I see acceleration, because that has something to do with the topic of this paragraph, all right? So because the movement, and again, I'm rereading, because the movement of the crystals in the otoliths generates the signal of acceleration to the brain, and because the laws of physics relate that acceleration to net force gravity. I know what gravity is, right? And remember, I'm just writing down what I know in order to help myself figure this out. Keeps us on the earth, right? It's the pull that keeps us on the earth. So that acceleration, because the laws of physics relate that acceleration to net force gravity. So if we're walking or running, we're still on the earth, right? Gravity is always implicit in the signal. So that's part of this signal to the otoliths is gravity. So I'm going to put gravity here because it has something to do with it. I'm not sure what. So gravity. Thus, this is a concluding word here. Thus, the otoliths have been referred to as gravity receptors. So gravity receptors. They are not the only ones. Now, this only ones refers back to gravity receptors. So they are not the only gravity receptors, right? The otoliths are one set of gravity receptors, but they're not the only ones. Mechanical receptors in the muscles. So the muscles have gravity receptors. Tendons have gravity receptors, and joints have gravity receptors, as well as pressure receptors in the skin, particularly on the bottoms of the feet, respond to the weight of limb segments. And limb segments must be legs, right? They're your limbs and arms and other body parts. All right. So we have dissected this paragraph pretty well, right? We know that it has something major to do with acceleration because acceleration is 1, 2, 3, 4 times has been said. So it has something to do with movement, either of the head or walking or running, okay? And we know it has something to do with the inner ear because that's where the vestibular apparatus is, right? It's in the inner ear. But then it also has something to do with gravity receptors that are all over the body, right? They're in the inner ears, they're in the muscles and tendons and joints and skin, and then the bottoms of the feet. So if we think of all of this stuff together, and we think of movement, and we think of how that relates to gravity, you need some background knowledge here. And I have a little bit of it. I'm going to tell you a story. My dad, when he was alive, he was having some problem with his jaw. And I don't know exactly what, I was little when this was happening. I was little enough to not understand what was going on. But there was some part of his jaw, and I don't know if it was a cavity that went through his tooth into his jaw and rotted the bone or what. I have no idea, but I do know that they had to take part of his jaw bone out. They had to remove it. And it was kind of in the back of his mouth. So kind of close to the ear. So if you can like take your hands and feel where your jaw is kind of, you can feel the joint of your jaw when you're moving your jaw, and you can feel that part, and then it's really quite close to your ear. So it's that last part, that's what they had to take out on one side of his head, okay? And at that time, they were replacing bone with a metal called titanium. So he had an implant of a bone, like they replaced his bone with a little implant of titanium in the same shape as his jaw. So his jaw would still be intact, but it would be titanium instead of bone. And after that healed up, he just had a terrible, terrible time because he was dizzy all the time. He was dizzy, dizzy, dizzy all the time. And they figured out that the reason he was dizzy was because that titanium was very, very close to his ear. All right, so there's one story. Here's another story. The next story I'm going to ask, well, it's actually a question that I'm going to ask you. How do you feel when you are laying down, like in bed, and you get up really fast? Have you ever felt really dizzy when that has happened? You get up and you're like, whoa, and you kind of have to sway and get your bearings before you can get balanced again? All right, and I have another question for you. Here's another scenario. How many of you have ever, like in the middle of your living room, just turned around and spun around and around and around and around and around? I'm sorry, my son is in the background digging in the refrigerator right now, so that is the background noise that you're hearing. So if you're spinning around and around and around, then you stop and you're kind of off kilter again. So all of that has to do with your vestibular apparatus, because that fluid in your ear and that gel in your ear gets sort of sucked to one side. Or if you've been laying down, it kind of settles wherever it is. And when you get up really fast, you have to wait until that fluid gets back into the right way you're going. So that means that really what they're talking about is balance. Have you ever seen like a 1-year-old try to learn how to walk? They're trying to get that linear acceleration going, and they can't. They just fall down on their bum all the time because they don't have that balance yet. And the vestibular apparatus in their ears have to figure out how to get that balance going. And your inner ear has a lot to do with balance. You know what else has a lot to do with your balance? The bottoms of your feet. Your big toe, if you lost your big toe, you'd have to learn how to walk again, because that is a really big balancing part of your body as well. So that was the other clue for me, because I knew about my dad and his dizziness. And I know about getting up really faster, right? And I've also had 3 children that I've watched to learn how to walk. I know about that balance part. I know that the inner ears have something to do with balance. And then when it talked about the bottom of the feet, I was like, yep, this has to do with balance. And that acceleration part makes sense. So I know that they're talking about balance here, not your inner ears. Even though your inner ears are a big deal about it, right? They're going to talk about balance and how it's centered in the inner ear. But they're talking about balance. Okay? So I hope that helps you think through. This was the most difficult paragraph, by the way. So if you slogged through it, good for you. You have one more paragraph, and I'm going to let you slog through it yourselves. So we'll see you on the next slide.